Working with AI tools like Klein or Cursor are kind of like a PM. You have to figure out all the dependencies and requirements, have your workers know the tasks and the outcomes that you expect from them. And all of this kind of gets boiled down into a prompt. So you hear a bunch about prompt engineering. In this video, I'm going to give you 5 tips on how to really make your prompts hit harder in data engineering. Now I'm going to create a pretty simple continuous integration process using AirByte as the backbone of all of this, but these tips can be used anywhere. So let's just jump straight in. Now my data pipeline's defined with inside AirByte. And if you think about AirByte, at the core of it is sources and destinations and connections to move that information through. So right now I'm looking at some of the enterprise connectors that are available directly from AirByte, or I could go and search for hundreds and hundreds of other sources and destinations in the marketplace, things contributed by our community. Now these are sources and connections that appear inside the AirByte registry, so they're always known and always available in all environments. But let's say I'm working on my local on-premises installation where I'm using an API or a backend system that isn't available in the marketplace. I can use the builder to create this and then make it available specifically inside my workspace. So you'll see here I have 2 very simple API endpoints that will return me a list of hot coffee and iced coffee. Yes, this API actually exists. Coffee is pretty important, but I can go and run a test, make sure these work. Behind the scenes, all of this is defined in a YAML manifest file. This file defines all the configuration parameters required for that connection. Now, very specifically, this is what we call a declarative connection. I've declared it with inside my environment. It's not available in the AirByte registry. But if you think about it, what I want to do is create a continuous integration pipeline script. Previously, this was very difficult to do with inside AirByte, but thankfully, we added a series of API endpoints and definitions to get these declarative endpoints. So if I go down and have a look at my workspace, I can look at declarative sources, declarative destinations. So very specifically, I can now use this API to automate my process of creating my CI script. This is exactly what I'm going to do with Cursor and some really good prompt engineering tips. I'm inside Cursor and starting to go. Obviously, we're going to get started creating our prompt. Now I've already gone ahead and created my prompt here, but tip number 1, always make sure that when you're creating a prompt, you give it a role or a persona. So in this instance, I'm saying you're a senior data engineer automating a CI/CD process. What I've done is I've given the reasoning model background and context to say that you should now start to know and understand the best practices that that type of role an engineer knows how to do. LLMs are trained on the world's knowledge. They're able to see what a senior data engineer knows and does and uses, and what are the frameworks and the processes. So adding this little bit of role context is fundamentally important for the reasoning models that you're going to use to create your applications. Now, step 2, when creating a really good prompt, and this may seem obvious, but lay everything out in a nice formatted, bulleted way. Don't worry about additional words. Use markdown formatting and bullets to really define very clearly your tasks, requirements, and outcomes. So you'll see here, one of the things that I want is I want to create an environment file with all of these tokens. I want to use a very specific API and SDK, in this instance, obviously the AirByte SDK. And what I want to do is I also want to tell it to use the local host. Now, because I'm developing on a Docker image on my local machine, not with inside the cloud, some of the AirByte documentations will talk to api.cloud.airbyte. I want to tell specifically what my prompt and what my data engineer should use. In this instance, it's in localhost. I'll give it a few more bits of information, very specifically something like, I only want to clone sources in my environment that are prefixed with the words dev. And then when I move them into a test environment, I want to prefix them with the word test. This is just a way to make it easy for me to demonstrate this process. Tip number 3 is about programming and best practice guides. Try not and put too much of that technical implementation inside your prompt. You're going to have to keep creating it when you have any follow-up questions or follow-up prompts. Best practice is to create it with inside a rules file. Now, Cursor does this by allowing you to put everything under a .cursor file and then create a new file called rules. Now, every single time that your prompt is actually run, it's going to look at these rules files and apply them to your prompt. So now I've already gone and created a number of rules. I'll make these rules available with inside the repository at the end. Let me just grab these, paste them into my rules file here. And again, I'm using Markdown to make it easier. But what's really important is I'm providing links and information and context to the documentation that's required. I also want to provide any naming conventions that I like to use here. Now you'll notice inside here I've included links to libraries and reference to API docs. This is good as a backup with inside my rules file as additional context. But one thing that you want to make sure, and this is tip number 4, is to make sure that you take advantage of vector embeddings. Now, vector embeddings are obviously a way that you can do searches with inside AI, but specifically when I'm creating a prompt, agents don't necessarily have the ability to go out and crawl the web for a URL that you've provided. The best way to do that is put that context, copy and paste it from a website, for instance, and put that context into a Markdown or a text file and load that into a vector store. Now that all sounds pretty complicated. The great thing is Cursor makes it really easy for me. All I have to do is create a knowledge folder, and any Markdown files or text files that I add in there will automatically be added into a vector. I'm just going to grab all the ones that I need, drag them into my knowledge, and you'll see they've been added into my repository. Now each one is pretty simple. It's just provided a little bit of additional information and sample usages on what I want to use. So authentication, for instance, I want a very specific way to handle authentication tokens and bearer tokens and refresh. So I'm telling and giving the prompt on how to do it with inside this configuration. And then these new endpoints, in case it can't reach that URL, I've provided the exact information that it needs. It's the URL that's required, it's the name of the required fields, and an example. I've provided each one of those. Okay, now that I've got my rules set up, my knowledge file set up, everything is ready to go. I'm going to grab my prompt. And let the agent do all of the work. Again, you'll notice I've got this nicely formatted. If you do need to add some more, you can use Shift-Enter to add new line breaks, for instance. And let's run that and see how we go. So now, while this is running, tip number 5 is don't trust everything that AI generates for you. It's going to take a while for things to get right. Everything's not going to be perfect. Just think, we're data engineers, we're creating code, and sometimes things don't work. So don't assume everything runs properly the first time. These AI tools are amazingly productive tools, and they will get you a long way, but spend the time to review the code at the end. And very specifically, if you see an error, don't use vague words like "this is wrong, fix it." Look at and give it some requirements and very specific definitions. So let's accept the file and have a look here. So far just looking at the code, these squiggly underlines just mean that I haven't imported the libraries just yet. But you'll see that Cursor's actually given me the instructions to do that here on the pip on the side. Looking down the code here, everything is looking correct in terms of the way that I want to set up my client, manage the secrets and the tokens and the refresh. But very specifically, let's have a look at the retrieving of the source and destinations. This actually looks pretty good. I think we're pretty close to get going and running. I ran my application, things weren't quite right. I saved you some time, and like I said with tip number 5, I went back and through to make sure that all of the areas and all the requirements were correct. Took me a few times just to make sure the prompt is right. You can see some of the adjustments that I created with the script, but every time that I made a change, I went back and modified my prompt, that I always keep the prompt inside a repo, and made sure my rules were very clear and very specific. Now that everything is fixed, I can take advantage of these new API endpoints very easily by taking, if you remember, I had those two definitions of those destinations, the hot and iced coffee. I can now actually take those, run my Python script, and what you'll see, if we look at the output, it's gone and found a source starting with dev, which is what I wanted, the dev coffee. It's gone, modified that, and moved the metadata definition that's in that YAML manifest, modified it to point to test where I wanted it to, gone ahead and created it into a test environment based on those requirements inside my app. So there you have it. Using 5 really good, really simple AI prompt tips, I've actually been able to create a complete CI process that uses AirByte's new API endpoints for managing those declarative definitions and moving them all with code. So you can start to automate all your processes very easily. And that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Make sure you subscribe and follow for more. Thanks very much.